Hello Internet! With a recent livestream, we've been introduced to the first batch of buffs in the history of Star Rail. The characters that are buffed are namely Silverwolf, Kafka, Blade, and Jingliu. All these characters will be rerun soon, with Blade and Jingliu coming right in the next version, while they have already mentioned Silverwolf to be coming in a version after the next. And with that said, let's take a dive into all of these new changes and take a look if any of these characters are worth going for. The first on the list will be Silverwolf, which in my opinion has gotten the best buffs out of the four. The first buff she obtained is on her ultimate, where it now targets all enemies. This immediately solves her issue before where she can only target one enemy with the ultimate, and with the current endgame being filled with AoE or multi-target scenarios, her ult really left more to be desired. People have since always used Pela instead just for the AoE death shred, but now that Silverwolf has got that, she can finally be considered in your team comps. Her defense reduction can go up to a total of 69% to all enemies now if she uses her ult with the resolution shines like Personal Sweat-like code. A higher amount than Pela normally. However, do note that it's still not higher than Pela's first two turns with her technique reducing an extra 20% defense on all enemies. However, that will go to pass once the two turns done though. I won't lie, Silverwolf's technique should also do something like this, but they didn't mention that in the live stream, so we'll have to see. Maybe she does have that as a buff, or maybe she doesn't. Even assuming she doesn't though, the amount of defense stretch she has is more than enough to be considered usable. Moving on to her second buff, she now prioritizes implanting the weakness of whichever element the character in your first slot is. This is a godsend because before it was an RNG fest where you don't even know what weakness implant that you're gonna get unless you have your full team going mono element, and it really wasn't too versatile. So yeah, what a wonderful change. And finally, she also regenerates more energy at the start of combat and at the beginning of each turn. This makes her get her ultimate faster without being forced to use her skill if you don't need to, which is awesome. Going through all the buffs, she seems to now be able to take Pela's spot in any teams and perform just as well. What sets her apart will be her ability to implant weaknesses. If you use her with Akron against an enemy without lightning weakness, Silverwolf easily pulls ahead of Pela in terms of value. Not to mention, Silverwolf's ult has pretty good damage on it as well. However, I doubt they keep it that way since it now targets all enemies, right? No way you keep the same multiplier for a single target attack, but it just now targets everyone. If they somehow keep that, you may be able to consider a sub-DPS Silverwolf that can really drop a nuclear bomb with every ultimate. Something big to consider is now that Silverwolf can hit every enemy. Combine that with Castrus's Lycon that also ignores defense, you can achieve up to 80% defense reduction, which effectively boosts Castrus enough that you can have Silverwolf replace even Tribi in a Castrus team. Now obviously Tribi will still do better, but if you need her elsewhere, Silverwolf can be a close replacement, potentially better than Ron May in this team. As a conclusion, I think Silverwolf is now considerably stronger and 100% usable in today's meta. For players that really love her, pulling her will be worth it for sure. However, for people just wanting to get by and save pulls for crazier new characters, which will come, that's just how Star Rail is, sticking to a Pela is the wiser choice. For pure meta chasers of fast clears, Silverwolf might actually be a solid choice for some zero cycle clears, especially Vitalions. But I'd hold off going for her until I at least know more about the drip marketed Harmony character that will come soon. Before we move on, we are actually shown that her E2 and E4 has been changed as well, with the only details on E2 being shown though. The E2 is now much more valuable, easily overtaking Pela in terms of damage amplification. Also, it will need testing, but if Silverwolf can implant a random bug for every ally's that attacks, and if that counts towards Akron's ult stacks, that'd be immensely strong for an Akron team, and you might see E2 Silverwolf being the best in slot in an Akron team if that's the case. But well, in any case, you need E2 anyway, so yeah, not a lot of us have that. Now, if we compare Silverwolf to Jiaoqiu, things get a little bit more complicated since they both affect different damage amplification, with Jiaoqiu focusing more on increasing damage received rather than defense reduction. In the end though, who's the superior like damage amplifying debuffer? It's kind of hard to tell, but I doubt they'll be too far different in terms of value for a team. Plus in the end, Silverwolf still comes with a whole weakness thing. It's a little bit different than what Jiaoqiu brings to the table. With that said, let's move on to the next person, which will be Kafka. She also obtained massive buffs as well. Firstly, her skill will trigger more dots on enemies, whereby the adjacent targets of her skill will also trigger the dot damage when hit by her skill. Before it was only the main target, so this is awesome and raw damage increase for her. Another buff she obtained is when a teammate hit the enemy with any attacks, she will do her usual follow-up attack, but now this attack also triggers the dots too. That is insanely good. Her ultimate now also recovers the amount of follow-up attacks she can perform, while whilst from before you can only get one follow-up attack per turn. This is a decent and general increase in dot damage output for Kafka. The only issue isn't even with Kafka herself, but for the fact that the rest of the dot team is still not quite completed. There lacks either a dot main damage dealer that focuses solely on applying dot with high damage and for Kafka to trigger them, or a dot buff specialist that allows the whole team of dots to do more damage as a whole. However, this already bodes pretty well since it means Hoyo has not forgotten about dot and is likely planning to add dot characters in the future, or at least buff other dot characters too. For now, buffing the most important dot character in Kafka is a great first step. For the question of should you pull Kafka though, in terms of just meta talk, still no currently. And the simple reason being the dot archetype is not completed yet to really excel right now. But this changes when you consider potential future dot characters being introduced, or if they buff current other dot members like Black Swan. It's impossible to tell what will happen, right? Therefore, my best recommendations is to skip if you don't see yourself ever touching dot teams. But I do recommend just grabbing her if you do see yourself doing so, and yeah, Kafka is likely the most important dot character that cannot be easily replaced. It's like pulling Ranmei and waiting for the next big break effect DPS character, right? You have to have the Ranmei first, or else that team would just be an awkward scenario, and that is the case for Kafka in a dot team. Coming up next, we'll be talking about Blade now, and oh, do I miss the days where Blade could solo MOC. With the new buffs, he now scales off of max HP fully, and he has a higher chance to be hit in his Hellscape state. Finally, his follow-up attacks regenerates more energy now, and yeah, this isn't as flashy of a buff as compared to the others, but it fundamentally makes Blade slightly stronger, especially for multi-target scenarios. Being able to be hit more by more targets while having an increased rate of using his ultimate, plus the fact that he deals more damage now, they're all just straightforward numeric increase that will aid Blade in his damage output. His best team of Tribi and Hyacinth with her light cone can most certainly clear out waves of enemies in especially pure fiction. However, depending on the numbers, he will still be less prominent in MOC or Apocalyptic Shadow with thicker elite or boss enemies. On the topic of should you pull him, well, in the end, you never really want to spend limited recurrencies just to get Blade on a rerun banner since he is available in standard these days, right? But if you really love Blade, go for him obviously. Still, I recommend again spending limited pulls on him though. And although we're not shown in the live stream, if there's any good change with his Eidolons, he might now become the most worthy damage dealer to be pulled in the standard banner. I will add as well, I would die for Blade to somehow get a whole rework and basically have Mighty's entire kit. It's just too suitable for the Undying Blade, but oh well, maybe next year. The last character on this list will be Jingliu, which have obtained quite a wild buff. She now deals damage based on her own max HP, so yep, the usual Jingliu that we built with high attack no longer works. We're gonna have to swap a lot of her relics. Well, unless if you choose to stick with her old kit, which is an option, but why would you do that? Another buff with her is that each time your allies lose HP, she gains stackable crit damage buff. This makes her perfect team almost completely identical to Blade's, especially with Hyacinth plus her light cone that reduces 1 HP every turn. That just means free crit damage buff for Jingliu every turn, right? The final buff she obtained is where she will gain an extra syzygy stacks as she enters transmigration state. This allows her to deal more damage overall, and yep, how strong she is still depends on her numbers and how she scales off her HP. But this is a decent idea to fit Jingliu in the HP change based version in my opinion. I'm sure it will do well and you'll see decent results with Jingliu paired with the newer HP based support. I suppose it still makes sense for Jingliu since she always had the HP change mechanic for her. Yeah, personally I would just prefer more mechanical changes like in the case of Kafka, right? That one's fun. For this one though, it's a pretty raw increase, which hey, it's still welcomed. On the topic of should you pull, this one's more direct. Decide based on the numbers. I mean, it is the case of damage dealers. It's usually just pull for the one that hurts the most or pull for whoever you love. As long as you got two teams that clears everything, you got nothing to worry about. And what decides if Jingliu can clear everything is just the amount of which she scales off HP, right? If she scales very well, you can use Jingliu to clear everything. That's a character you can think of as your main damage dealer for one of your two teams. And that will be all for my coverage on the buffed characters. I think the one most worthy of consideration will be Silverwolf, considering her all-encompassing buffs that pretty much solves all of her issues. I really can't think of any other issues that Silverwolf has that really stops you from using her anymore. Like, you now have a reason to use Silverwolf. It's a higher defense threat across the whole fight compared to Pella, right? But the opposite is also true. If you have a Pella that functions fine anyway, you don't have to force yourself to go for Silverwolf, right? Now, with testing, her E2 might change a lot in the meta even, where Akron's team might see a very massive increase in prowess. She also has changed to her E4, which God knows what change that would be. If it turns out to be insanely strong, then I would hope in the future Superwolf will be slowly added into standard banner, and E4 Superwolf is something we can hunt on the standard banner now, and it would be actually pretty exciting in a long while to pull on a standard banner, right? But well, for now though, I'm excited to see just what her E4 has entail, and just generally how she would work out. The person that got the most interesting buff is certainly Kafka. We've kind of got to think about potential future dot characters, but it is kind of a pain because you don't really know what Hoyo is thinking, right? We all thought, oh, with Kafka and Black Swan, there should be newer dot characters coming soon. It may mean that they're gonna come sooner, it may mean that they're just not gonna come. You never know with Kafka, and that kind of suits her personality, right? You just don't know what's going on with her. But in terms of just mechanically speaking, I feel like her standalone buffs are the most interesting one to me, and I can't wait to just try her out anyway. Blade and Jingliu both are still damage dealers and are most susceptible to be categorized as the pull if you love them type of character, but they're definitely dependent on their final multipliers. If their multipliers end up being just whatever, then it might not be worth it to even go out your way to pull for them. So let's hope Hoyo does a good job at balancing their numbers. And yep, with that said, let me know what you think about the buffs and who you're gonna be going for. I personally think I don't have an option, and I will get drained by Saber anyway, so yeah, I hope you get whoever you want, man. And that'll be all. Take care.